I do.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last
Is Ashley Vallier, spelled Vallier. I'm a forensic scientist at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
How long have you been employed at the State Police Crime?
Just over 5 years. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry and cell biology from University of California, San Diego. I have a Master of Science degree in biomedical forensic sciences from Boston University. I worked at the Broad Institute for about 6 months before getting a job at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
Broad Institute, that's located in Cambridge?
Correct.
What type of work did you do with the Broad Institute?
I worked for the Center for the Development of Therapeutics department, doing quality control checks on compounds that they think could have potential to be therapeutic drugs.
Went to work for the Mass State Police Crime Lab, or MSPCL, in early 2019?
Correct.
When you first went to work for the MSPCL unit, were you initially assigned?
Trace Arson and Explosives Unit.
Is that the unit that you still currently work in?
It is.
And so you started with the lab as a forensic scientist. One is
Correct. A forensic scientist 1 is the initial job that you're hired as. After you've been at the lab for a year and once you're qualified and signed off to do casework, you become a forensic scientist 2.
Within the Trace unit, what types of analysis that you do?
Unit has a lot of disciplines. So there's fire debris examination, explosives examination, serial number restoration, gunshot residue analysis, fibers, paint, glass, physical match, trace recovery.
And specific to yourself, what is it that you do within the Trace?
I do gunshot residue analysis, trace recovery, and physical match analysis.
With physical match, can you explain to the jury what goes into that? Or
Physical match analysis is looking at 2 or more items that have broken or irregular edges and seeing if they fit together like a jigsaw puzzle.
and what types of instruments are you using?
It's mostly the stereo zoom microscope, which is a microscope that's mounted on a stand so that it can look at larger objects and not just slides like in science class.
Now, you're familiar with the lab is accredited?
Correct.
It's accredited by NAB.
Correct.
What types of areas have you taken proficiency testing in?
I've taken proficiency tests in gunshot residue analysis and physical match cases.
Successfully completed each of those?
I have.
You become involved with the lab case number 22-02184.
I did.
There's a name that's associated with that lab number, a suspect or a defendant.
Read.
What piece of analysis did you become initially involved in?
Physical match on many different items.
Before we get to the physical match,
I later received debris that was collected from the clothing items.
you recall which clothing items you received debris from?
I just received the debris that was already packaged. It was labeled as coming from jeans, boxer shorts, sneakers, gray long sleeve shirt, and an orange t-shirt.
Each of those items had a lab label number associated with it, is that correct?
Correct.
With specific reference to item 7-18.18, debris from an orange t-shirt and a gray long sleeve shirt, correct?
Correct. Each of these items was packaged in a fold, and so I opened up the fold and looked at items under the stereo zoom microscope and documented it with photos. There was apparent dirt debris, many black, gray, blue, and orange apparent fibers, several pieces of red apparent plastic, several apparent hairs, 1 piece of green material, and 1 piece of clear apparent plastic.
The clear apparent plastic, if any measurements did you conduct?
It measured approximately 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 an inch.
What if you were within the lab, they went following your analysis?
Another analyst in the trace then looked at those items.
And are you familiar with another person who works in the trace unit named Christina Hanley?
I am.
So what training does Ms. Hanley have that you do not have in order to conduct that further analysis?
Christina Hanley is the trace supervisor. She is signed off to do casework in fiber, miscellaneous, paint, other trace disciplines that I am not.
Essentially, those items contained within that debris were something that you examined microscopically, made observations of, took measurements, and then they went to Ms. Hanley?
Correct.
You mentioned some plastic items that you looked at.
They were all as recovered from 34 Fairview Road. Pieces of apparent plastic and apparent glass, and 1 drinking straw.
And those items were labeled as items 7-5 through 7-19?
Yes.
And explain to the jury sort of process and what you did and what you looked at as you went through each of these respective items.
Physical match case, you always look at the questioned items first, which are the ones that you know where it came from. Here, they're labeled as coming from the road, so you don't know where their actual source of origin is. We'll scan that item into my custody, and then I will document the packaging with photographs, and then I'll open that item and then document that item as it is. There are multiple pieces. Each piece will get a designator like piece A, piece B, piece C. This gets documented, written down in my notes and in photographs. If any of those pieces look like they could possibly fit together, then I will look under the stereo zoom and see if they do, in fact, fit together, and document it if they do. And then once I've finished documenting that, I'll repackage it in the original packaging. And then if there are multiple items, like in this case there were, then once that first item is sealed up, then I'll clean my bench and then I'll open the second item and do the same thing until the items have been documented.
And how were you looking at them physically? What did you do with those items?
So like I said, I opened up each of these items individually, took photos, took notes, looked at them under the stereo zoom microscope, and then they'd all been packaged in their original packaging. And then I looked at the photographs to see if any of those pieces could possibly fit together. And so I looked at the photos and saw that it looked like there were possible physical match fits among those questioned items. Then I opened up those items and looked to see if they, in real life versus just on photos, if they could have a potential physical match. And then if it looked like it did, then I brought them together and looked at that in the stereo zoom to confirm if there was a physical match.
Recognize those?
Yes, item 7-5.
And is that how it was presented to you, or the evidence bag that you opened and the items that were contained within?
This is just a picture of the seal, not the entire bag.
62. Do you recognize that?
I do.
That the evidence bag that you were presented with regard to items labeled as 7-1.
That's the seal on it, yes.
Process that you're talking about, sort of fitting the puzzle pieces together. How long a process?
In this case specifically, there were many items to look at, so it did take quite a bit of time.
And do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 263?
I do. Those are the 3 pieces in item 7-5.
Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
I do. Seal and then the items from item 7-6.
In reference to that, as far as the labeling is concerned, these are items that were submitted by the state police, correct?
Yes.
From the labeling that's exhibited in Exhibit 271, that submitting agency is in the date that the item was collected, correct?
Presumably, I don't know because that's not our lab's labeling system.
Your observation of these evidence bags as you were opening them, or boxes as you were opening them, they had different dates on some of them, is that correct?
I don't know.
Up on the screen that's now been marked as Exhibit 272, these were the items that were marked within that box or that bag of 7-6, is that correct?
Correct.
It appears 2 pieces of clear plastic, correct?
Parent plastic, yes.
Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs, ma'am?
I do. Item 7-8.
What difference was there between the color, the size, the shape of the different items that you received?
Some of the pieces were clear apparent plastic, some were clear apparent glass, some of them were red apparent plastic, some of them were silver colored apparent plastic.
How would you describe their physical size, shape?
Some of them were very small, and some of them were larger. Can't tell you the dimensions without looking at my notes.
And you took measurements with respect to each of the pieces that you analyzed.
Correct.
And what's up on the screen is now in line 278. You recognize as the bag of box that contains item 7-8. Now, what's contained in this exhibit up on the screen, number 279, you recognize that as contents collectively labeled as item 7-8.
I do.
And so, from a variety of those different pieces that are depicted up on the screen in exhibits 279, each of them would have been respectively labeled as far as, say, 7-8.1 or 7-8 point something else. Is that fair to say?
So the laboratory numbering system where it goes 7-8.1, that's if you take a subsample. So if I had collected debris or something out of this item, that would then be labeled 7-8.1 because it's a new entry in our limb system. These are just the different pieces in 7-8. On my notes, I gave them labels such as piece A, piece B, piece C, all the way down to, well, however many there were.
You labeled them individually, is that correct?
Correct.
Picked it up on the screen in this exhibit of 282. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Is that one of the pieces that was submitted within this as far as 7-8 that you examined throughout the course of your analysis here?
It was. There's actually 2 pieces in that. There's the large one in the middle, and there's a very small one up in the corner.
You recognize those, ma'am?
I do.
What do you recognize those to be?
Photos that I took of item 7-10.
That's the bag of box that contains item 7-10.
Yes.
Steelman, if I could have 1955. Again, what's up on the screen is that the item that was contained within that evidence.
Yes,
Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
I do. Packaging that item 7-9 and 7-19 came in.
Yeah, approach. Ms. Lair, what's up on the screen is that the evidence bag or box that contains those items that you were just testifying about, 7-9 and 7-19.
Yes,
But now what's been picked up on the screen and been marked as Exhibit 297. Contained within this are 3 clear glass or plastic.
I have 3 pieces of apparent plastic.
Now, I'm going to go in and could slow down. The item that's contained above those 3 pieces of apparent clear plastic, what is that?
That is item 7-19. That is a black straw.
And what's up on the screen next to Blair now, and it's been marked at 99. Is that essentially the straw, an actual ruler with its measurements? Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, the photographs that I asked you to look at before, recognize those to be?
The photos I took of item 7-11.
And what's up on the screen is that the bag, this bag that contains item 7-11.
Yes.
And for the record, that's been marked as Exhibit 310. It's filming if I could have 1982. And again, Ms. Blair, what's picked up on the screen on Exhibit 311 is that the items or the pieces of plastic that were contained within the aforementioned evidence bag in the previous exhibit, item 7-11. The graphs that I just placed before you, and do you recognize what's contained within those photographs?
Photos of item 7-14.
You recognize what that is?
I do.
That's the bag that contained item 7-14, is that correct?
Yes.
What's depicted on the screen is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what was contained in the exhibit bag from the previous exhibits, labeled as item 7-14.
Yes.
You recognize those?
The photos of item 7-12.
Direct your attention up to the screen. What's contained in what's been marked now as exhibit 328. That contain the items labeled as 7-12.
Yes.
What's been marked as exhibit 329 that were contained within that evidence bag from the prior exhibit.
Yes.
Those photographs that I presented to you a moment, do you recognize what's contained within those photographs?
I do. Photos of item 7-13.
And Ms. Blair, what's depicted on the screen in that photograph, which has now been marked as Exhibit 343, is that the evidence bag that contained the items labeled as 7-13?
Yes.
And
Yes.
have you had a chance to review those?
I have photos of item 7-15. It is.
This is the evidence bag that contains item 7-15. Has now been marked as Exhibit 352.
I do.
And up on the screen are those the items that were collectively identified by the lab as item 7-15 from that evidence bag.
Yes. Pieces that were large enough I printed out labels from a label maker with the lab number, the item number, and then I assigned it, so ABC and my initials. And those are on pieces. If there were 2 pieces that fit together, I documented that with photos, wrote it down in my notes. And then if it was within the same item, I held it together with tape and then repackaged it still together as a single piece.
As far as the matches that you were examining, was that solely within piece to piece, or at some point did you also look at sort of a larger piece as far as a housing unit for a taillight?
Yeah, so from the items that we just saw, I was able to piece one larger piece with many of those pieces all fit together into one piece that I then called piece 1. There were some other pieces that also fit together among those question ones that I called pieces 2, piece 3, piece 4, and piece 5. Piece 1 was a physical match with item 3-1, the tail light.
Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am.
Morning.
Now, Ms. Vallier, when we had left off the other day, I believe you had just looked at some photos of item 7-16. Do you recognize what's in those photographs?
Photos that I took of item 7-16.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce in a minute. No objection. You recognize what's up on the screen is that photograph, which is now been marked as Exhibit 332.
Yes.
Is that one of the items from 7-16, actual ruler with the measurements corresponding?
Yes.
Piece from 7-16 that's now been marked as Exhibit 369.
Yes.
Where, as far as this particular item is concerned, with reference to the texture of that particular piece of plastic, what did you observe in reference to that? Surface area of that particular piece of plastic, how would you describe that?
There are little dots on it. They're not just dimples of a sort.
What's up on the screen has now been marked as Exhibit 371. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And that is another piece next to a ruler memorializing its measurements from item 7-6.
Correct.
I'm showing you a series of 11 photographs. Ask you to look at those and look up.
Can you tell Mr. Yannetti what those are so he can look at his copies?
Counsel was shown each and every one of the photographs prior to the court coming in today. But I'm happy to give them to counsel as well.
I just need to know the particular evidence numbers.
Do you recognize those?
I do. Photos that I took of item 7-16.
Additional items contained within item 7-16, is that correct?
Yeah,
You recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 373?
that was one of the photos I just looked at.
And as far as the evidence bag containing items from 7-16,
Yes,
do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 374?
I do. A photo that I took of item 7-16.
Do you recognize what's depicted up on the screen?
I do.
In particular, one of the red plastic pieces from item 7-16, is that correct?
Yes,
Next, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 378?
I do. One of the photos that I took of item 7-16. One of the photos that I took of item 7-16.
And this particular item up here as Exhibit 380,
That's a piece of red and clear apparent plastic.
a piece of red plastic with a piece of clear plastic sort of within the same piece.
Apparent plastic, yes.
If you could explain to the jury again the process that you undertook as far as these.
Item is documented separately. Photographs, notes. I put a label with the case number, item number, and then A, B, C, etc. If there are multiple pieces in it, a label on each piece. I look at the photos to see if there are any similarities, dissimilarities, see if there are any potential pieces to compare. If I do think that there are pieces that could be compared, I'll open those items, keep them all separate, and look at them in real time to see if it does look like they could be consistent before I bring them close together. And if it still looks like they could be consistent, then I'll bring them together to see if there is an actual mechanical fit, and then I'll document that and look at it under the stereo zoom. Stereo zoom is also called a stereo microscope. It's a microscope that is on a stand, so you can put larger pieces of evidence underneath it. I did this by color because it seemed the easiest way to organize all of these pieces.
The individual item number.
As part of my initial examination when I'm documenting that item, if there are multiple pieces, I'll compare those pieces first.
And then if there are any pieces that are consistent, are you then cross-referencing that item's pieces with pieces from a different item? I'm showing you another series of 19 photographs. Just at
These are photos from my case, either within the same item that had a mechanical fit that I'd then taped together, or mechanical fits from between different items.
I was going to hand them to you after they were marked.
That's fine. May I speak with counsel for 1 second? Thank you.
First with item 3-1. That was the passenger side taillight housing, is correct?
I believe so.
You analyzed pieces of that along with the housing unit itself, is that correct?
Do you mean like there was the taillight and then there were smaller pieces also in the
Correct.
print? Yes,
And you took measurements of the various pieces that you observed?
I did.
And did you record those within your notes?
I did.
Do you recall what those measurements were?
Do you want all of them?
We're starting with reference to the taillight housing assembly.
So the taillight I called piece A in this case, and it measured approximately 14 inches by 9 inches by 8¼ inches.
Which of the pieces that were contained within that sort of taillight evidence bag did you compare to the taillight housing itself?
There was a lot of very, very small pieces that I took pictures of, but they're very, very small, so they were not suitable for comparison, so I didn't look at those. There were some larger pieces that were suitable for comparison, so I did look to see if they fit in with piece A.
With regard to that analysis of whether or not they fit in with piece A, which of those pieces did you find did fit?
So amongst item 3-1, piece A and piece B fit together mechanically, and then piece A and piece F fit together mechanically.
Expound upon what you mean when you say they fit together mechanically.
When things break, they break in a unique pattern, pretty different every time. So a mechanical fit is bringing two things with broken edges together to see if they were originally part of the same item. The broken edges align, and that's a mechanical fit.
Item 7-5, you looked at those various pieces together as well.
I believe so.
And were there any three pieces in total from 7-5, B, and C? Is that correct as well?
There were no mechanical fits amongst those three pieces.
Item 7-6, there were two pieces, A and B, within that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And were there any physical matches within those two pieces of item 7-6? 7-8. As you recall, how many pieces were contained within that?
There were 14 pieces.
Of those 14 pieces, they were each compared to each other. Is that correct?
Correct.
What mechanical fit did you find between the pieces contained within 7-8?
Pieces C and D were found to fit together mechanically, and then pieces E and F were found to fit together mechanically.
How many pieces were contained again within item 7-9?
Repeat, there were no mechanical fits.
7-10, how many pieces?
One piece.
7-11,
6 pieces.
what physical matches did you find?
There were none.
In 7-11, how many different colors of pieces were contained within 7-11?
There was black, red, and colorless apparent plastic.
7-12, how many pieces?
There were 14 pieces. They were all colorless. Pieces B, C, D, F, and K all fit together. Pieces E and I fit together. And pieces M and N fit together.
7-13, how many pieces were?
3 pieces. It was red and black apparent plastic. There were none.
Item 7-14,
There was one piece. It was colorless.
7-15, how many?
There were 8 pieces in colorless apparent plastic. Piece F and piece H together.
7-16, how
There were 7 pieces. It was red and colorless apparent plastic. Pieces A, C, and D fit together mechanically.
you did those analysis from the individual items? Did you do with those individual items with reference to the taillight housing?
I compared all of the questioned items to each other, so 7-5 to 7-19, to see if any of those pieces would fit together. Amongst those, I was able to make 5 larger pieces that I called piece 1 through piece 5.
What, if any, conclusions did you come to as far as your analysis of those pieces?
Larger pieces amongst different items that fit together mechanically. I can see that those items were once a part of the same unit.
Which of those items were you able to find mechanically fit with each other?
Are you asking me like which specific items made up like piece 1?
Correct.
So piece 1 contained pieces from items 7-5, 7-8, 7-10, 7-11, 7-13, 7-15, and 7-16. Those specific pieces from all of those items were at one time together as part of a larger unit.
What comparison or analysis did you do of items between item 7-15 and item 7-16?
Pieces from item 7-15 and 7-16 were part of piece 1. I could look through my notes and see if they're a part of any of the other pieces that I fit together. Piece 2 consisted of pieces from item 7-15 and 7-16.
7-6 and 7-11.
Piece 3 consisted of pieces from item 7-6 and 7-11.
Similar to what you had described before with 7-15 and 16, and 7-6 and 7-11, what, if any, conclusions did you draw in regard to that?
Those pieces from item 7-6 and item 7-11 were at one time together as a larger unit.
Item 7-8, 7-9, and part of 7-16, what if you were you able to do with reference to those?
Piece number 4 consisted of pieces from item 7-8, 7-9, and 7-16. Those pieces from item 7-8, 7-9, and 7-16 were at one time together as a larger unit.
In reference to item 7-12 and 7-14, what, if any, analysis did you do with reference to pieces from those items?
I have item 7-11 and 7-12 that fit together for piece number 5.
Exhibits 384 through 402, we've asked to publish some of those to the jury.
Yes.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen as now Exhibit 384?
I do. Within item 7-16, those are pieces that were mechanically fit together.
Do you recognize what's now been marked as Exhibit 386?
I do. That is what I called piece 1, the piece that is made up of Apparent plastic pieces from many of the different items. These labels right here are the labels that I put on each piece individually when I initially examine it. That's still piece one. It's from a different angle.
You recognize what's up on the screen now that has been marked as Exhibit 390?
I do. That's still piece one, taken from another angle.
You recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 392?
I do. That is another angle of piece one.
What are we looking at in Exhibit 395?
That is piece two.
You recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 398?
I do. That is piece three.
You recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 399?
I do. That is piece four.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen now that's been marked as Exhibit 401?
I do. That is piece five.
Right, put before you another 23 photographs. Do you recognize what's depicted in those 23 photographs?
I do. That's comparisons between 3-1 and piece one.
Item 3-1 was the taillight.
Correct.
Do you recognize what's on the screen that's been marked as Exhibit 403?
I do. That's one of the photos comparing item 3-1 and piece one.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 411?
I do. That's the contents of item 3-1.
At what stage of this analysis or comparison process is that?
When I initially looked at item 3-1.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 431?
I do. On the left is item 3-1, piece A, and then on the right is piece one.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 432?
I do. It is piece one on top of item 3-1 in a mechanical fit.
Is that the mechanical fit that you were talking about earlier?
Yes.
In reference to those items that you testified to earlier in item 3-1, the taillight housing, what, if any, conclusions regarding those items as far as a physical match?
That item 3-1 and the pieces that make up piece one were at one time together as a larger unit.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You have testified that when evidence comes into the crime lab, it's given crime lab evidence or item numbers.
It's given a case number, and then each piece of evidence gets its own individual item number.
Consistent with that policy, the evidence that your lab received in this case was also given those item numbers.
Correct.
I'd like to ask you about 7-18.18. Would you agree with me, and feel free to check your records, but would you agree with me that that was the item number given to, quote, debris from orange t-shirt and gray long sleeve shirt, end quote? And again, it's 7-18.18.
Debris from orange t-shirt 7-17 and gray long sleeve shirt 7-18-JO.
Item 7-18.18 did not include the orange t-shirt itself, correct?
No.
I believe that you just testified that was given a different item number, which was 7-17.
I believe so.
And 7-18.18 also did not include the gray long sleeve shirt either, correct?
I didn't look at 7-17 or 7-18. I only received the debris from.
So with regard to the orange t-shirt and the gray long sleeve shirt, those were given separate item numbers, and you examined what was the debris allegedly from those shirts, right? 7-18.18, correct?
Correct.
That debris consisted of different categories. One category was dirt and debris, correct?
Yes.
You did not test the dirt and debris.
Correct.
Another category was, or were, I should say, several apparent hairs,
Yes.
and you did not test those hairs, correct?
Correct.
And another category, I believe you've already testified to, consisted of several pieces of red apparent plastic and one piece of clear apparent plastic that measured 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch. Is that accurate?
There were several pieces of red apparent plastic, and then one piece of clear apparent plastic measuring approximately 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch. Yes.
And I apologize for continually reminding you, but I'm just mindful that everybody needs to hear you. So to the best you can, if you can just keep your voice up, I'll try to do the same. When those several pieces of apparent red plastic and one piece of apparent clear plastic came into your possession, those pieces were obviously not embedded in either shirt when you examined them.
I don't know. I didn't examine the shirt.
So to my question, the pieces that you saw were not embedded in a shirt when you examined them.
Correct.
That's because you never took possession of any shirt in this case.
Correct.
The pieces were loose and they were not embedded in anything.
I examined the debris from the shirt. I don't know what the person who packaged it did to collect that.
So it goes without saying that you never saw those pieces on either the orange shirt or the gray long sleeve shirt, correct?
I did not.
And you obviously had no control over how the evidence was handled before it came into your possession.
We have a chain of custody in the laboratory, but I did not follow the evidence as it went through the chain.
We'll talk about the chain of custody in a minute. Before this evidence came into your possession, you did not witness who seized it.
Correct.
You did not witness who handled it.
Correct.
Before it came into your possession, you don't know who had access to that evidence,
All of
correct?
our evidence is stored in locked facilities.
I guess let me modify that question. Before it came to your lab, you don't know who had access to that evidence, correct?
Correct.
Also don't know, before it came to your lab, whether the shirts in question were at all separate from the red or clear plastic pieces were in the possession of certain members of the state police, correct? Chain of custody at the crime lab starts with noting which state trooper delivered the evidence to your lab and the date that he or she delivered it, correct?
Crime scene responder. The person who drops off the evidence to the laboratory, yes.
Oh, in this case, which particular state trooper delivered the orange T-shirt and gray long sleeve shirt to your crime lab?
I don't know.
Which state trooper delivered the pieces of red and clear plastic pieces, I should say, that you just testified about?
The item 7-5 to 7-19.
Right, the pieces of red apparent plastic and one piece of clear apparent plastic measuring 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch. That's what I'm referring to.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. You understand what I'm talking about, right? In terms of the several pieces of red apparent plastic and then the one piece of clear plastic that you have the measurements for?
You're talking about the parent plastic that I noted in the debris of 7-18.18?
Correct. Which state trooper was it that delivered that?
Do you know?
Sorry, that's that's an odd question.
I don't know if you want her to repeat it, Ms. Giannetti. Go ahead. You have to repeat that, please.
Evidence is
No,
submitted to.
what you just said that he missed.
Oh, I said that's kind of an odd question.
Oh, not for me.
So,
Do you have a record of that?
a record of what?
A record of which state trooper delivered that debris to the lab?
Wouldn't be delivered as like debris. It would be delivered as the individual piece of clothing, which then got assigned item 7-18, I believe. And then as someone analyzes each offshoot of that piece of evidence, gets a 7-18 point something. The debris collected from that shirt is 7-18.18.
Oh, listen, I want to confirm with you that when you were assigned to this case, you were aware that the date of the incident was January 29th of 2022, correct?
Yes.
All right. And it's your testimony that you don't know which state trooper delivered the shirts to the lab, correct? You would check your notes for that, please.
Item 7- in this case was submitted by True Proc.
How long after January 29th of 2022, according to your records, did Michael Proctor deliver that clothing to the crime lab?
Delivered on March 14th, 2022.
Okay, so about 6 weeks or so after January 29th, is that accurate?
Sure.
Given that your lab received this evidence on March 14th of 2022, you can't testify to the chain of custody of the clothing or the pieces of plastic prior to March 14th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
Except for the Taillight housing that was seized by Maureen Hartnett, except for that, your chain of custody at the lab for the two shirts plus the pieces of plastic in 7-18.18, that began on March 14th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
Between January 29th of 2022 and March 14th of 2022, you do not know what Michael Proctor did or didn't do with the orange T-shirt and gray long sleeve shirt, correct?
I don't know.
Your lab received from Michael Proctor several different evidence bags containing red, clear, and black pieces of plastic, correct?
Correct.
Some of those evidence bags contain relatively small pieces of plastic in them, correct?
Correct.
And some of those evidence bags contained larger pieces, right? The
Correct.
evidence bags that you received listed the dates of recovery of those pieces of plastic.
I believe so.
The evidence bags that you received also listed the officer who recovered the plastic pieces, right?
I believe so.
When you receive those evidence bags, whatever numbers are on them, your lab assigns them your item number, correct?
Correct.
Item number 7-8 contained multiple pieces of red, black, and clear pieces of plastic.
14 pieces of red, black, colorless, and silver-colored apparent plastic, yes.
Date of collection was February 3rd of 2022.
February 3rd, 2022.
It was also collected by a trooper named DeChico, correct?
Yes.
What is that?
It is the handwritten label on item 7-8.
That would have been the evidence bag that your lab received and gave item number 7-8 to it, correct? And indicated what the date of collection was and which trooper collected it, correct? At that date, February 3rd of 2022, was only 5 days after the January 29th blizzard.
I don't recall the dates of blizzards.
Let's put it the date of the incident. You would have
Okay.
previously testified that was January 29th, correct?
Correct.
All right. And February 3rd was 5 days after that, right?
Yes.
Now, Exhibit 279, which is displayed on the screen, this is one of the photos taken of some of the contents of item 7-8, is it not?
That's the entirety of the contents of item 7-8.
Those were the pieces that were inside that evidence bag, labeled February 3rd as the date of recovery, 5 days after January 29th. You see that there are some relatively small pieces that were allegedly found on February 3rd.
Correct.
I'd like to contrast some of those pieces with some of the pieces that were found days and weeks later by Michael Proctor. I'd like to display Exhibit 343. You were previously asked about Exhibit 343, which is now displayed on the screen.
Yes.
That is the first evidence bag submitted by Trooper Proctor, is it not? He submitted evidence bags all at one time, correct?
Yes.
So when I said the first evidence bag, I meant the earliest date of collection. I should have asked it that way, February 8th of 2022.
I don't know all of the dates that each item was collected on.
According to the evidence bag that you received, the contents of that bag, which were, again, pieces of plastic,
Pieces of apparent plastic.
those were found 5 days after the pieces that you previously testified were found by DeChico, right, on February 3rd?
Correct.
All right. February 8th was now 10 days after January 29th.
Correct.
Looking at Exhibit 346, this particular piece found on February 8th by Trooper Proctor was quite a bit larger than many of the plastic pieces that had been found by Trooper DeChico 5 days earlier on February 3rd.
I mean, there were a variety of sizes of pieces on the other one. That is what is that, approximately 4-ish inches?
Right, but my point is, Exhibit 346, what's displayed, that plastic piece, is quite a bit bigger than the small pieces that were contained in DeChico's collection, correct?
Then some of those pieces, yes.
I'd like to move on to item 7-15, and if I could show Exhibit 352. The evidence bag that supports that lists the law enforcement officer who recovered the plastic pieces as Trooper Michael Proctor.
Correct.
And the date of recovery of those pieces was February 11th of 2022.
Correct.
And again, hearkening back to Chico's evidence bag from February 3rd, this is now 8 days later that these pieces are found.
Correct.
Almost 2 weeks that these pieces are found after January 29th, right? 13 days? 355, that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 11th is also quite a bit larger than those small pieces that were contained in Trooper DeChico's evidence collection, correct? On February 3rd. Item 7-16, if I can display Exhibit 436. That also lists the law enforcement officer who recovered the plastic pieces as Trooper Michael Proctor.
Correct.
And the date of recovery of those plastic pieces was February 18th of 2022.
Correct.
So Trooper Proctor is now finding these pieces over 2 weeks after the smaller pieces were found by Trooper DeChico, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
February 18th is nearly 3 weeks after January 29th, is it not?
Correct.
380. You would agree with me that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 18th is also quite a bit larger than those smaller plastic pieces found by Trooper DeChico on February 3rd.
Correct.
This one appears to be about 11 centimeters long, approximately.
Sure.
Exhibit 376. You would agree with me that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 18th is also quite a bit larger than those smaller plastic pieces found by Trooper DeChico back on February 3rd, correct?
Correct.
That appears to be larger than the piece that you just identified in Exhibit 380.
The one that was just on the screen?
Right.
Yes.
This one appears to be maybe about 18 centimeters long. Does that seem accurate?
It's longer than the ruler.
If we could show Exhibit 378, you would agree with me that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 18th is even larger than the last one that we just saw, correct?
In length? Yes.
This appears to be about 19 centimeters long.
I mean, longer than the ruler that's up there. I have the actual measurement in my notes.
The precise measurement's not important. I'm just getting at the relative comparison. This one's certainly quite a bit larger than the smaller pieces found by Trooper DeChico back on February 3rd, correct?
Correct.
This larger piece of red plastic, like the previous two that you just identified, were all found on February 18th, about 3 weeks after January 29th, according to your records?
Correct.
Regarding these last 3 evidence bags, labeled item number 713, 715, and 716, in February of 2022, from February 8th to the 18th, those were all plastic pieces collected by Michael Proctor, correct?
Correct.
In addition to collecting those plastic pieces on all those different days, Michael Proctor was also the person to hand deliver those last 3 evidence bags, all on March 14th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
And you do not know what Michael Proctor did or didn't do with those evidence bags of pieces of taillight prior to March 14th of 2022 when your lab received them, correct?
Objection.
I'm going to sustain it. We've already asked that.
The taillight of that Lexus sits in the housing of the Lexus, the taillight housing, such that part of the taillight faces the rear of the car and part of the taillight loops around and faces the passenger's side of the car, correct?
Sure.
Because it's on the corner.
Sure, yeah.
You'd agree with me that once you received the final pieces of taillight from Michael Proctor on March 14th, or once your lab received that, you were then able to piece together a majority of the taillight, correct?
I wasn't assigned this case until later, once everything had already been submitted to the laboratory.
Right. It was true that after Michael Proctor submitted these pieces of taillight on March 14th, it was after that that you were able to do the reconstruction that you testified about, correct?
Correct.
If I could have Exhibit 432 displayed, that is the reconstruction, the final reconstruction that you were able to do, correct? You would agree with me that there's one section of that taillight that was missing completely, correct?
Correct.
That missing section is noticeably visible in your reconstruction, is it not?
Yes,
And do you still have that laser pointer there?
I do.
Would you please point to the section of taillight that's missing? Okay. Appears to be a hole on the upper left side, the exhibit.
Yes.
If we could zoom back out, the portion of taillight that you did not have was strictly on the rear side of the taillight, if I can call it that.
I am not sure what orientation that goes on to a car.
But in any case, to this day, you do not know where the pieces that make up that hole are or what happened to them, correct?
I do not.
If I may have a moment.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lally.
Your Honor. Now, Ms. Vallier, in reference to items 7-17 and 18, the orange T-shirt and the gray sweatshirt, you never actually physically saw those items, correct?
The clothing, no, I did not.
The debris that was provided, are you familiar with how that process or who got those debris items from those clothing items?
I can look at my notes and tell you who submitted it or who transferred it to our unit.
If you could.
Your witness is ready, Mr. Lally.
I'm sorry. And from your review, who was that person?
Maureen Hartnett.
As far as the 1/8 of an inch by a 1/16 of an inch red and clear apparent plastic pieces that you observed within that debris. That was mixed in with other debris as far as dirt, fibers, things of that nature. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch pieces that were contained within that debris, was that something that you observed visually or microscopically or both?
Visually, I take overall pictures of the debris, and then I'll look through the stereo zoom to see if there's anything that looks different, and I'll take a picture of that. So that is what I did. I looked through the stereo zoom.
Now, as far as the collection of evidence, you don't know who was a trooper, who was there when they were collected, how many troopers were there when it was collected, when it was collected, anything to do with that?
Yes.
And as far as the pieces that you testified to, as far as fitting them mechanically together, all of those pieces then fit mechanically onto the taillight housing taken from the defendant's vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
All right, Ms. Vallier, you are all set. Thank you very much. All right.